Go for it. All right, welcome everyone. We have the children in church with us today because we have school holidays and the mum's having a break. So hopefully I don't go on too long for the kids. Just to touch on quickly. So Psalm 73, I thought something that ties in a little bit from that psalm with tonight's message is the wicked scoff and speak wickedly, in that we're going through here some of the final words of Jesus that he warned us about the condition of the world before he returns. And hopefully I can share with you guys a bit more about what Jesus tells us to look for. So today is Palm Sunday. I've got to point it over this way, I think. You going to work? Come on. It's on. Oh, Dave's going to click it for me. There we go. Okay, there we go. So approximately 550 years before Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, or a foal of a donkey, Zechariah prophesied the coming of the king. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." And the Jews recognized this when Jesus came in. The religious leaders didn't really want to, but the regular Jews knew this prophecy. And today, 2,000 years ago, Jesus fulfilled this prophecy 550 years after it was written. And this is significant. If you click to the next slide for me, thank you. This is significant because it proves the accuracy of biblical prophecy, that everything God's told us is going to happen, will happen, and everything he's told us has happened, before it happened, did happen. So today is a very significant day because, it was the day that the Israelites celebrated their Messiah coming in, but it was only a week after that they rejected him. And because of that rejection, Jesus didn't fulfill all of the promises at that time. They're coming to a future fulfillment. So I'm just going to read Matthew 24. So it's the Olivet Discourse is what it's commonly referred to. It's actually chapters 24 and 25, but I'm only going to go through chapter 24. It probably would have been, as I dwelt on it this week, it probably would have been better to possibly run through it over 2 weeks because there's a lot in there, but I'll do my best to cover what I can for you without being too quick with it all. So Matthew 24. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all of these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will all these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumours of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. And then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, and they will betray one another, and will hate one another. And then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads this, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand, and therefore if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out, or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. And so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler of his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Sorry about that, was quite long, but obviously all relevant. So we're now 2,000 years from, or around about, since the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey. And I want to ask everyone today, are you ready for Jesus' triumphant return? Just like the Jews were back then, are we ready for when Jesus comes back to earth to be with his church? So if Jesus came back today, what would you be doing when Jesus comes back? How do you feel about your current condition? And how do you want to feel if you knew Jesus really was coming back tonight? So just dwell on that while I go through this tonight. So in the book of Daniel, we're told of a 70-week prophecy. Each week of the prophecy represents 7 years. I'll go through this fairly quickly because it's a sermon on its own, but it's relevant to Palm Sunday and also to Matthew 24. That total time period is 490 years. And this prophecy states that from the day that the Jews would be given the instruction to rebuild the temple to the commencement of Jesus' millennial kingdom will be 490 years. So there's little things, if people want to go back and do the maths on it, a Jewish calendar was 360 days. Back when this prophecy was written, we used 365, and there's all sorts of little things, but there's people much smarter than me that have gone and pieced all this together. So of that 70 weeks, the first 69 weeks have already been fulfilled, which was to the day from March the 14th, 445 BC to the exact day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem in 32 AD was 483 years, which is 69 weeks. So we still have 1 week of that prophecy to be fulfilled, and that final week is the tribulation, the 7-year period, which is the time of Jacob's trouble, not the time of the church's trouble, but Jacob's trouble. It's a time for the purification of the Jews because they rejected their Messiah. So when Jesus rode in on the donkey, the Jews at that moment could have all accepted him, but they didn't. They rejected him, and because of that, they were scattered around the world, which is recorded throughout the Old Testament, that they would be scattered for rejecting him, and then before Jesus returns, they would be regathered back to the land, which we're currently seeing happening as we speak, ready for Jesus' triumphant return and for the Jews to finally accept their true Messiah. So if we click, I'll try clicking here again, or unless... Oh, you've done it? Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. It did work. You can... Yeah, so so we're obviously here in the calendar, which is lining up with today because we have Easter next week, but this is... This sermon on the Olivet Discourse was given on the Tuesday, as in Tuesday this week. Jesus rode in on the donkey today. So, and then he died, obviously, next week. So this is all in the final week of Jesus' life. If we go to the next slide, I have a bit of a just a slide there to show the lead up to this sermon that Jesus preached. Jesus went in and threw the tables over for the money changers in the temple. Tomorrow would be when it's occurring, and then the day after that is when Jesus gave this message. So also on the Monday, Jesus washed the disciples' feet. So we're in that time period. So introduction to Matthew 24. At the start, we have the destruction of the temple, which has obviously already occurred. And then we move into the signs of the times and the end of the age. And then the great tribulation, and then the coming of the Son of Man. So if you want to... I'll try clicking this, Josh, so I don't have to keep... I'll see if it works. Oh, no. If you jump across, I think 2 more slides over. Yeah, that's it there. So I have put this slide up before, but that's where the Mount of Olives is. You can see the temple up here, and then the Mount of Olives off to the right here. Just for people who like visual indications, which I do. So the setting, in the weeks leading up to this moment, Jesus had spent warning the disciples and the religious leaders of coming judgment and that the Messiah would be rejected. At this point in time, he's just left Herod's temple for the last time before his death, and he heads out with the disciples to the Mount of Olives, where he stands and looks down on Jerusalem. So the Mount of Olives sits up above the temple. I think if you go to the next slide, I do have a picture. Oh, it actually was at the start, so don't worry about it. So Jesus was likely standing at the top of the Mount of Olives looking down on the temple when he made this prophecy that the temple would be destroyed, which obviously makes it much more significant when you're looking at this grand temple, which I'll go into a bit more detail on. This account here is also recorded in Mark 13 and Luke 21 from the perspective of the other disciples, obviously inspired by the Holy Spirit, but each with their own sections in there. And the Mount of Olives is the very same place he would soon ascend to heaven from, and it's the exact same place that we're told Jesus will return to. His feet will land back on the Mount of Olives when he returns to earth to establish his millennial kingdom. One thing I wanted to talk about, this bit's not tying in exactly, but just through my readings this week preparing for this, one thing I think Satan's really working strongly with in our world today is fear. Al Gore, in his famous movie about 10 years ago, predicted that by 2014, half of the earth would be underwater. So these are prophecies given by men who are not believers, and that the prophecy obviously did not come true in any way, because there might be slight sea level rises in certain areas, but certainly half the world isn't underwater. So there's earthly prophets out there, and then there's God, the true prophet, speaking through men and recording events that really will happen to the exact detail that they're recorded in. So if you want to skip to the next slide, Josh. So one of the things I want to touch on with prophecy is we need to use discernment. There's a lot of Christians out there with a lot of different views, and people who are much smarter than me, and a lot of them have very good angles to come from on different things. So anything I preach to you today, this is what I believe God has shared with me, but it's up to you to go home and read the Bible for yourself and make sure you agree with that. But one of the things I was going to touch on, so a healthy balance to me is, I've had many Christians tell me, don't read Bible prophecy, it's not profitable, it's it's a waste of time. Well, actually, a third of the Bible, I think it's 32% or 33%, so a little under a third, is prophetic. So are we then saying that we should just ignore a third of the Bible? That's ridiculous. But at the same time, we have to be careful, and this is probably more of a word to me, not to become prophecy obsessed, in that everything you read could potentially be prophetic. So that then ties into signs. What signs? A lot of Christians who don't read prophecy, they don't look at anything happening in the world as any indication that Jesus could be coming back, such as the rebirth of the nation of Israel back in 1948. A lot of Christians got really excited, and a lot of Christians say, oh no, that has nothing to do with the Bible, even though God did tell us thousands of years ago that the Jews would be scattered and that they would be regathered. The opposite end of that is people who every time they feel the smallest tremor on the earth, or they see the moon's got a bit of tinge of red to it, suddenly, oh look, there's a sign, a biblical sign. We have to be careful that we don't listen to people who turn every single event out there in the world into a sign that Jesus' return is imminent. That being said, Jesus does tell us live every day like I could return today, and we are told to live that way. So again, just apply discernment to what you hear, what you read, and yeah, just be wise and be led by the Holy Spirit as well. So the temple, there were two temples, as most people know. There was Solomon's temple, destroyed by King Neb, I've shortened it there, but King Neb of Babylon back in 586 BC. And then there was the second temple, built in 516 BC, which is the one here Jesus is looking down on. It was destroyed in 70 AD by Titus of Rome. So around 40 years after Jesus made this prophecy, the prophecy was fulfilled to 100% accuracy. So both temples were destroyed on the exact same day, 656 years apart, on the 9th of Av, which is the Jewish calendar. So I believe God did play a part in that, but I won't know. That might be a question I can ask him when I get to heaven. But yeah, to the day they were destroyed. And this site, for those who don't remember, is actually the site where Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice him, and God stopped him and said, no, this isn't happening. Obviously testing him, but speaking to that future sacrifice of God's own son Jesus on the cross, and the incredible burden that was for God on a son who wasn't a sinner. So if we click through, I've got a slide up there, a picture of Herod, or a statue of Herod. Yeah, we can go to the next one. That's the temple. We'll put the temple back up in a second. So Herod, again, I've often read the Bible when I was younger and read Herod as Herod, but there's actually lots of Herods. So there's Herod the Great, which is the Christmas story. There's Herod Archelaus. Joseph went to Nazareth instead of Bethlehem because of him. There's Herod Antipas, who killed John the Baptist. There's Herod Philip, who ruled the area north and east of Galilee. There's Herod Agrippa the first, who was eaten by worms, which people can read about in the Bible. And then there's Herod Agrippa the second, who carried out the trial of Paul in Caesarea. So when you go home and read your Bibles, just be aware there's lots of Herods, and it does help to understand the different Herods, but that's just a little bit of extra information. So if we go back to the temple. So this is a picture, a 3D sort of render of what someone believes Herod's temple, or the second temple, looked like. So the opening of the second temple, Ezra 3 verse 12 to 13. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, Solomon's temple, they wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. So why did they weep? They were upset at how poorly constructed the second temple was compared to the original Solomon's temple. Some people might read that differently, but it was much smaller, less grand. A lot of the things that were inside the first temple had been destroyed when they got taken away to Babylon. So the older Jews who'd come back to help rebuild this temple, it does also say, yet many shouted aloud for joy. So there was a mixture of emotion. Some people were very excited that the temple had come back, but those who'd seen the original temple, it would seem, were not very impressed with the build quality of it compared to the first one, even though, if we click to the next slide, yeah, here. So I did a little 3D drawing for everyone. So Herod's temple, the second temple, was rather modest when compared to Solomon's temple, and was refurbished by Herod the Great, which is Herod the Christmas story. Herod was not just a ruler, he was also a great architect and took great pride in the project of rebuilding the temple. He increased its size from 17 acres to 36 acres. I chose acres because I thought the demographic in the room would prefer acres to hectares, but I still float between both. So, and it was one of the largest and grandest projects of its time in the world. So even though the Jews who saw it weren't that impressed by the original temple, this was still a monument. So it just sort of speaks to the grandness of the original temple, I suppose. The bricks and stones weighed up to 100 tons each and were 14 metres long and 5 metres wide and 4 metres high. So I did that on Google SketchUp a couple of nights ago for you because I wanted to see how big were these stones, and that's just one stone. So when Jesus is talking to the disciples and telling them not one stone will be left upon another, with modern cranes, we can probably look at that and think, oh, that would take a really big crane, but it's probably achievable. But back then they had horses, donkeys, they had wooden wheels. I have no idea how they got numerous versions of these stones and put them on top of each other. But it took about 80 years to actually complete. Herod died before it was completed, so the next Herod took over, and there's multiple Herods involved if you read the history. It took 8 years of piling up the resources to build it before they even started construction because it was such a grand exercise, and it was adorned in gold plates and white marble. And apparently historical accounts of the time said that if you looked at it in full sunlight, you actually had to shield your eyes because of the grandness of the white of the marble and the gold that would reflect into your eyes. So the point I'm trying to get to here is the Jews were very proud about the construction of this temple and what it stood for because it represented their nation. And Jesus was tearing down that pride because they were about to reject him and telling them, you've put all your pride in this temple rather than me, and it's coming down. So in verse 2, we read about the temple's destruction, and in 66 AD, still under Roman occupation, the Jewish population rebelled against Rome. And on the 4th of August 70 AD, which I mentioned before, the temple was destroyed and the Jews scattered around the world as prophesied. It would appear, reading through some historical accounts, that in an effort to take the gold that adorned the walls of the temple, the stones were all cast down. So the Romans desperately wanted to get all the gold. There is an account that the temple was set on fire and the gold melted between all of the rocks. And to get the gold out from between the rocks, because there was a lot of gold there, they had to actually rip all the stones down to get to the gold. And then it's also recorded that parts of the temple and the money from the gold were used to finance the construction of the Roman Colosseum that we see standing today. So if we click to the next slide, if you went to Israel, go to the next one, sorry. Yeah, so these are stones from the Second Temple that were cast down off the wall that you can still go and sit on today. And you can see the size of these. They're obviously busted up, but it shows you that exactly what Jesus prophesied was fulfilled. If we go to the next slide, this is an inscription from the Roman Colosseum that talks about the fact that the spoils of the war of taking all the money from the Jews was used to build the Colosseum. There's a little bit of controversy out there about that, so do with that what you want because that's not in the Bible, but I think it's still interesting. It was the Romans who destroyed the temple and they're the ones that constructed all of these buildings, so it would make sense that they did use that money and rub it in the face of the Jews a bit. Look, we've built a Colosseum for killing people out of the money that we took from destroying your temple. So there was a big war at that time. I believe about 1 million Jews were killed. The Romans surrounded them. Apparently they tried to starve them out, and people were turning on each other. Jews were turning on each other because of starvation. So Bible prophecy, the destruction of the temple is a foreshadow of the future destruction of Jerusalem during the time of the Antichrist. So not only did it speak to the Jews' pride in the temple back then and the destruction of all of that for rejecting the Messiah, it also speaks to future prophecy. Verses 4 to 14 contain items of historical fulfillment, with many of the disciples being handed over and killed back in Jesus' time, and many Jews turning on each other due to the famine at the siege in Jerusalem. But all of these things will have much larger, grander fulfillment at the end of times. So what I'm sort of touching on there is the fact that when we read Matthew 24, there's verses in there that a lot of people hold as only being future. Or some Christians say, no, it happened in the past, it's already done, it's been fulfilled. And if we flick through to the next slide, here we go. So prophecy, more often than not, has both a historical and a future fulfillment. It's always 100% accurate. So John 14, verse 29, and now I have told you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe. So Jesus and God tells us what's going to happen, so that when it happens, we know that he's true, he's real, and that's prophecy proves the accuracy of anything that God says. So, but prophecy also often has a dual fulfillment, which is the picture up on the screen here. So often it was fulfilled at the time of the author and then has a separate future fulfillment. So historically, Antiochus set up an image to Zeus in the temple of God, which is the sort of precursor to the abomination of desolation, which Jesus refers to in Matthew 24. But in the future, the Antichrist will set up an image of himself in the future temple. So there's similarities, but the old fulfillment, it was never fulfilled to its full extent, because he set up an altar to Zeus, where the Antichrist will set up the image of himself. So if we flick through again, Josh, this is a timeline I put up before, but those who hold to the young earth view, which I do, we're now around 6,000 years after Adam and Eve were created, and that can be traced through the Bible, through the genealogies. For anyone that wants to do it, you can trace it back and prove all the ages of all the people in the Bible are there. So many people much smarter than me have gone back and traced it, but we're around about 6,000 years after Adam and Eve were created. So what Jesus is talking about here, and the reason I have this up, is we currently live, I've got up there, we live in what is called the end times. So from the moment Jesus ascended to heaven to the moment Jesus returns is the end times. So when we hear about the end times referred to in the Bible, if they're talking about the end times, it is something that could have occurred 2,000 years ago. It could occur today, but that again applies back to your discernment about a short-term fulfillment, a long-term fulfillment. But we don't always have to take the end times as, I believe we're at the end of the end times, so I do believe Jesus' return is very near, which is how we're taught to live. And then the next part is the tribulation, which is that 7-year period, the time of Jacob's trouble, the fulfillment of the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, where the church is raptured. So we go up, the church goes up with Jesus to the marriage feast of the Lamb to be married to Christ. And while that happens, the earth is put under judgment. And at the end of that 7 years, Jesus will return to establish his millennial reign, which Dave shared with us probably 6 weeks ago, the millennial reign of Jesus, a day that we can all very much look forward to. So the next slide, just zooming in on, is it coming up? Oh yeah, sorry, you can keep going. I put some arrows in there, sorry. Yeah, that's it. So the rapture and the second coming. So during the rapture, Jesus does not come back to earth. He comes into the clouds, and we're called up to the clouds to be with him. Where the second coming of Christ is when Jesus actually lands on the Mount of Olives and physically stands on earth to establish his millennial kingdom. So we also hear of the tribulation and the great tribulation. The first 3.5 years on that timeline up there is the first half of that 7-year tribulation. And it's a time spoken of in the Bible as, for some people have described the Antichrist as sort of throwing money out. Everyone thinks, wow, this guy's brilliant, he's great. And then it's at the midpoint there where the abomination of desolation occurs, the Antichrist shows his true colours, and he goes into that future third temple, and likely will slaughter a pig or something similar will happen. And that's when all the judgment seals come in that are spoken of in Revelation. That's the Great Tribulation. That is the really, really bad, horrific time that Jesus talks about, and others talk about too. So the signs of his coming, the church age, from when Jesus ascended to now, the end times, we're living in the end times. So I want to ask everyone again, are you ready? Are you ready and waiting for Jesus' return? And what is Jesus going to find you doing when he returns? If he comes back tonight, what's Jesus going to find you doing? So in verses 4 to 8, we see the lead up to the tribulation that I just put up on the screen, or it's still up there. Then we have verses 9 to 13, the beginning of the tribulation, verses 13 to 14, the end of the tribulation, and verses 15 to 26, mid-tribulation. So it sort of jumps around a bit. Again, there's dual fulfillment of a lot of these items, but that's the perception that most people would take of what Jesus is talking about here. So verses 3 to 14, the signs of his coming. So this is before the tribulation, when the church is still here. So these are things that we should be looking for. So deception. Verse 4, Jesus warns us of deception, of false Christs. I don't believe this is just false messiahs, but even more so, churches that promote false messiahs. So Jehovah's Witnesses teach us that Jesus is not God, but he is the Archangel Michael. So that is a false messiah. Muslims teach us that Jesus was born of a virgin, but he's not God's son. He was just a great prophet. He was just an ordinary man, a great man, but an ordinary man. He was not the son of God. Mormons teach us that Jesus is God's son, but not God himself, and that we can all become gods one day. These are some of the deceptions I believe Jesus is talking about, and I know that there's more deception to come. In 2 Thessalonians 22, now brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together with him, we ask you not to be shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So in 1840, a man by the name of William Miller, who was actually a Baptist pastor, told everyone that he knew the day of the Lord's return, which Jesus himself tells us at this point in time that he himself didn't know, only his Father knows. Jesus obviously knows now, but at the time there were limitations because Jesus had come to earth, but Jesus tells us that he himself, when he's talking to disciples, doesn't know the day or the hour of his return. So when anyone tells you that, you know that they're lying. So everyone gathered at a particular location. It was over in America. Many people lost their faith that day because they'd been deceived by a man who told them that told them all he knew the day of the Lord's return. And when that didn't happen, people's hearts were broken because they had this hope that Jesus really was coming back that day. So again, using discernment, we do need to live like Jesus really could come back today, and I believe he really could, but I don't know when he's coming back. So all I can do is live like he will come back today, hope that he will, but knowing that only God knows the day that Jesus is coming back. So that movement, for those who don't know, that movement went on to become Seventh-day Adventism, and they refer to that day now as the Great Disappointment. So anybody that holds to a legalistic, dogmatic view of an item like that, use discernment when people talk to you, because people will try and deceive you. A lot of these other movements, they know the Bible often better than Christians do, because I've spoken to a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons over the years, and they do know the Bible very well, and they will use it to deceive you, because a lot of the things that they actually learn is how to witness to Christians more so than ordinary Gentiles, because we are their target audience often. So be very careful out there, be discerning. So Jesus tells us about wars and rumours of wars, and these are the beginnings of sorrows. So we've seen wars occurring throughout history. I do believe Jesus tells us that as we get closer to his return, that it will be like birth pains, and we know that birth pains start slow. We have slow contractions. Lisa's daughter just went through this. They start slow and they get faster until the baby eventually arrives. So I believe a lot of the things Jesus is talking about here are going to increase in intensity, just like birth pains increase in intensity. So in verse 7, we read about nation will rise against nation. And in the Greek, that's ethnos versus ethnos. So we do see nations going to war against each other, but in the past 10 to 15 years, we have seen an increase in tension between ethnicities. And I believe that is something that the Bible does warn about, maybe not as much in the English, but when you read in the Greek, ethnos versus ethnos. We've got over in America a lot of, I believe, Satan is trying to stir up trouble between black people and white people. He's trying to cause division where there doesn't need to be division, because God's created us all equal. But I think that's something that Jesus warns us about here, that, whether it's nation versus nation, one person's skin colour versus another, they're all things that time with this prophecy. And then kingdom versus kingdom. I think Jeff did a brilliant message around 7 weeks ago on spiritual warfare. We have a spiritual kingdom out there that is at war, and that's occurring right now as we speak. And hopefully we can all start to open our eyes up more to that spiritual kingdom with the wisdom that Jeff provided us weeks ago through our Bibles, that we can really start to see that the spiritual war is much bigger than the physical war that we can see. And if we start to understand that, we will really, truly understand better what really is going on out there in the world. We won't look at it just as physical. We will see the spiritual aspects of it. So earthquakes are a sign of the end, remembering that the end time started 2,000 years ago, so we need to be careful not to get too carried away. One of my wife's friends, who I really love, she messaged me with that Melbourne earthquake a couple of weeks ago saying, do you think Jesus could come back today because of that earthquake? And not a criticism of that, because I did also read about when I read about big earthquakes, in my mind I think Jesus did warn us about this, but we also need to make sure we balance that excitement out with the fact that we could still be here another 100 years, we don't know. But it is a sign that Jesus' return is near. But those signs have been occurring for 2,000 years, and they likely will increase in intensity. In verse 9, the disciples, they were persecuted at the time, so we should also expect to be persecuted. And the closer we get to Jesus' return, the more likely as Christians we will be persecuted. So we already see persecution in Iran, in China, in Turkey, in countries where Christianity hasn't been the predominant religion, but we could very quickly see Australia turn the same way, and I believe that could happen in the space of 6 to 12 months. If the right circumstances come up, we could find ourselves in similar situations to the Christians of the past and the Christians of today in other parts of the world. So believing in the rapture and the promises of Jesus' return is a belief that we will not, as the Bible tells us, that the church is not appointed to wrath. We will not go through this time of incredible pain, but Jesus is also quite clear that we will go through persecution. It's just to what extent we don't know. But the warning here is for the tribulation saints. So the past fulfillment is the disciples being persecuted, and then the current fulfillment is Christians around the world currently being persecuted. But in the tribulation, when the church has been removed, we have what's referred to as the tribulation saints. And those people, we're told, will be beheaded for their faith. That the Antichrist will be given authority to hunt them down and to kill them. So the persecution for them, whilst there's persecution all over the world for Christians at the moment, the persecution in the tribulation will be far, far worse than anything we've experienced in the last 2,000 years. In verse 13, the disciples are warned that their lives will be tough, and this warning goes out to us all, as I said before, that life could be tough. I've had a very good life. I'm 39 in a couple of weeks, and I've got no idea what tribulation is, if I'm honest with you. And I know that if it comes, I'd like to say I'm ready for it, but I know God will help me to grow if tribulation does come, and if it doesn't, I'll be thankful that I haven't had to suffer like others have suffered, but I'm not foolish enough to think that I won't. So verse 14, I think this one's interesting, that the gospel will be preached to the entire world, and then the end will come. So I think for a lot of us, we've looked at the introduction of the internet, that the Bible is now going out to parts of the world that it couldn't in the past. Technology has allowed the gospel to be spread to regions of the world that just couldn't hear it before. But in Revelation 14 verse 6, we read about a mighty angel who will preach to all of the world during the tribulation. So is that verse referring to that angel? I believe it is, because I think as men, we can probably go to the majority of the world, but during the tribulation, this angel, the Bible does tell us, will go and preach the gospel to all of the world. In verses 15 to 28, if you want to skip through, I've got the Left Behind book cover up there, for those who've seen the Left Behind series or read the book. I haven't actually read the book, but I put it up there because it's one that a lot of people remember. So the Great Tribulation. So this section here is mostly referring to the middle point of the tribulation, when the Antichrist rises to power. So, and we see that in verse 15, that Jesus tells the Jews that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then flee for the hills. Some Christians today preach that when we see the abomination of tribulation, we're to flee for the hills. And some Christians are doing that right now because they think that events are leading to that. As someone who believes in the pre-tribulation rapture of the church, that the bride will be taken before this tribulation, I'm not looking for that sign, because we're told here to stay here and to witness to people. So as much as sometimes things come up where you might start feeling like fleeing for the hills, we are called to stay and to evangelize to people. So in Daniel 8, 9, 11 and 12, Daniel refers to the abomination of desolation, and also in Revelation 20. So Jesus refers to the book of Daniel, but they're the verses if anyone wants to look them up. There are some who say that this verse was fulfilled in AD 70 because they want to put these events as historical, but there's no record anywhere in the Bible or in history to suggest that there was any abomination of desolation that occurred in the temple when it was destroyed in AD 70. So I'm putting that there for just anyone who might have heard that these events have been fulfilled. They haven't been, because we do have Antiochus Epiphanes, who set up the image to Zeus in the temple, which occurred many years before Jesus made this prophecy. And then we have the Antichrist, who will set up an image of himself in the future in the future tribulation temple. And then we also do have what David spoke about, the millennial temple. So there's actually 4 temples, and the third one is not going to be to worship God. It's to fulfill this purpose of the tribulation. In verses 15 to 28, we read of the Great Tribulation, so that second half of the tribulation. So, Dave, can I get you to read verse 21, just to really emphasise what Jesus tells us in verse 21, Matthew 24, verse 21. Yeah, if you can. Just 21, verse 21. Yep.
But then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, not ever shall be.
Yep. Thanks. So Daniel in chapter 12, verse 1 says, there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. So Jesus and Daniel are telling us that this tribulation is going to be the worst period of time since Adam and Eve were created. So we can think of the things that have occurred in our lifetime, hearing about World War I, World War II, all the atrocities that happened there, the flood of Noah, which was far worse than that again. This is going to be worse than that. And Jesus tells us that it's going to be so bad that if God didn't cut the time short, that no one would survive. So this is a time that no one wants to go through. And to me, this is an evangelistic opportunity to inspire you to go out and preach to the lost, because I don't want to see anyone go through this time. We know that the majority of the world is likely going to go through it, but we don't want anyone that we love and care for, which God loves and cares for everyone. We don't want anyone to have to go through this time. So just a reminder that, yeah, if you get an opportunity to share with someone, I think I've mentioned this before, but I've warned some of my friends about this time. I don't believe many Australians are open to the gospel in today's world, but I believe when the circumstances that Jesus is warning about here come upon the world, those friends of mine who listen to me as a friend will hear those words and remember them, and they will go and look for I've told them, when you see these things happening, go and find a Bible and read it, because whether they're saved today or they're saved in the tribulation, it doesn't matter, because they're going to be with Jesus. I don't want them to go through the tribulation, but if they have to be saved, well, that's part of God's plan. But don't be scared to share with people that you don't think are willing to hear now, because when things are nice and peachy like they have been my entire life and most people here, there's no reason to look for God. But when things get tough, which they're going to get tough, people will listen. So you can flick through to the next little image there. So Jesus tells us in verse 34, this generation shall not pass until all of these things take place. So who is this generation? I've had different theories on this for many years. Hal Lindsey, I've never actually read his book, but I've heard about it numerous times, and I believe it is a very good book. He wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, and the pastor at my old Baptist church, he actually came to faith by reading that book and really being inspired at what was going on in the world. Lindsay arrived at the conclusion on this verse by suggesting that the generation which witnessed the rebirth of Israel in 1948 would also experience the Lord's visible return. So he didn't actually give a date. He wasn't like William Miller, but he did suggest that a generation is 40 years, which is, the Bible does refer in some areas to suggest that a generation will be about 40 years. But 40 years was 1988, so obviously he was quite wrong. And there were Christians who would have read that book, got to 1988, and then thought, well, what's happened? Jesus hasn't returned. I've also heard, and until I actually put this sermon together, this was a bit of a blessing for me actually, I thought, I've heard people, and good Christian men, say that a generation could be referring to 70 years. So 1948 plus 70 years is 2018. We're a few years past that. Maybe it's out by a little bit. Generation could be 75, 80 years. I believe now that this generation, Jesus says until all of these things take place. So not just the rebirth of Israel, which was prophesied, but all of the things that Jesus refers to in this prophecy, till all of these things take place. And for all of those things to take place, they're at the end of the tribulation. So these are the people, the tribulation saints. The generation that sees the tribulation begin, which is a 7-year period, they will witness all of those things occur, and then they'll see the Lord return. So that, to me, is a much more palatable answer, in that we don't have to try and guess and change how long a generation is. Jesus is specifically talking here to the people during the tribulation, and that generation that sees the tribulation begin will also see it end. Some of them won't, because they'll obviously be beheaded and killed for their faith. But he's also referring to those who aren't saved. So I'm coming towards the end here. So verse 37, the days of Noah. Noah spent 120 years preaching. That was how long God gave him to build the ark. So I don't know if he actually spent 120 years building it, but I believe he did. So it's a long time to be out there preaching to the world. And how many converts did he get in 120 years? Not one. He had his 3 sons and their wives, but not one of his friends listened to his warning of the coming flood. So any of you who feel down and out that you've gone and shared with your heart to friends and family and no one listens to you, just put yourselves in the shoes of Noah, because he had 120 years of doing it and didn't have a single person listen to him. So this prophecy of Jesus is that it'll be like the days of Noah. When the flood came, Noah had been preaching to them for 120 years. Not a single person listened. They're still out. They're getting married. They're drinking. They're eating. They're being merry, because they didn't want to listen to the warnings that the world does not want to listen to the warnings that Jesus gives us here, and they didn't want to listen to the warning that Noah gave them. There was a huge flood coming. And when God closed the door on the ark, not Noah, but God closed the door on the ark, Noah stood on that ark, likely looking out at all of his friends running to the ark, knocking on the ark, saying, let us in. We don't know if this happened, but you can picture the events of that day, that people are, I remember Noah said that a flood was coming. I believe him now. But God had already closed the door to that ark. And I believe God did it because he didn't want Noah living with the guilt of knowing that these friends that he'd warned didn't listen. But it was God issuing the judgment, not Noah. So in the same way, when Jesus comes back for his church and takes the church away to be with him, there will be those who heard the message and didn't understand it. But when they see suddenly, oh, that Christian friend of mine's gone, the government's telling me and the world's telling me that those people were part of a cult and they've gone and hidden somewhere, or there's going to be some sort of big cover story that Satan's going to push on the earth to cover up for the fact that so many Christians have suddenly vanished. A lot of people are going to believe the lie. It will be part of this great deception, I believe, that Jesus talks about, that the world will be deceived into thinking those people were just nut jobs. They weren't raptured. The rapture doesn't exist. But when we're taken, the people who do understand will realise, I'm going to go through this time of judgment that Jesus warned about, and they're going to start reading their word, but they're going to know that the consequence of being a believer during that tribulation period. So again, as I said before, this is going to be a time of incredible judgment like never seen before, because at the moment we have the restrainer, which is the Holy Spirit, who stops Satan from fulfilling everything that he wants to fulfill here on earth. And that restrainer is living inside the body of every believer. And it's our influence in governments, in just different, in councils, in working groups, in businesses. It's the influence of God throughout the earth at the moment that stops Satan from fulfilling all the dreams and ambitions that he's had, which is basically to destroy every human on earth. But once God removes the influence of the church from the earth in that rapture period, that is the moment when Satan can finally raise the son of perdition up to rule the earth and bring satanic judgment on the earth through the Antichrist. But then God will also bring judgment on the earth for rejecting the Messiah. So one of the things I was going to quickly touch on in relation to this is soul sleep. I think Dave talked about it before, but there's some churches out there that talk about soul sleep. When we are absent from the body, we are present with the Lord. So when we die, our spirit goes to be with the Lord. Jesus tells us that when he comes to take the church, that our bodies will be resurrected. So it's not our spirits that are resurrected, because our spirits are already up, as in those who have died. So we have my great auntie died only a couple of weeks ago. She was a big believer in the rapture of the church, and she believed it would happen in her lifetime, and it hasn't, but she lived every day like it would. And she is now with Jesus in heaven. And before I'm raptured, what Jesus tells us is the bodies of those who died before us will be raised, and those new bodies that a lot of us here are looking forward to, that new youthful body that Jesus is going to give us, that is when those souls will be given their new bodies, and we will go up to be with Jesus. So there is no soul sleep. Jesus tells, or the Bible tells us that when we die, our soul goes to be with Jesus, and only our body stays here on earth. The faithful servant and the evil servant. So as we wrap this up, when Jesus returns to rapture his church, will you be found to be faithful and waiting, or will you be the one who has given up waiting for his return and has gone back to your old life? So let us all pray that we'll be waiting and ready for his return. So some takeaways from today, if I didn't push any particular messages other than we all need to be living every day like Jesus really could return today. Point number one, I've got 3 points here, but we will all go through trials and tribulations in our lives, and many of you already have, but we are not appointed to wrath. So that horrible period of time, Jesus is coming to get us before that occurs. Point number 2 is look for the signs of his return, but in a balanced and discerning manner. Get excited. When you feel that earthquake, get excited that it is a sign of Jesus' return, but don't go so crazy that you go and sell everything that you have because, Jesus is coming back right now, but it could be the final earthquake. We don't know. So point number 3 is always be ready for his return, because Jesus is coming back soon. So I ask everyone again, are you ready? Are you waiting? And what will Jesus find you doing when he returns? So to wrap it up, if we put the last slide up, if you're not a believer, which I think everyone here is, but if you're not, if you're listening on Dave's video here, to be saved, to be with Jesus when he comes to return for his church, there's 3 simple things you need to do, called the ABCs of salvation. Admit that you're a sinner, believe that Jesus is your Lord, and call upon his name. And by doing that, you will be with him when he returns. So thank you, everyone, and hope you enjoyed that. Amen.